Right, welcome to another battle, um, or another challenge rather. Today we're gonna try to replicate this design here with some plain old HTML and CSS. Um, so we can get started, but before we do that, just want to quickly go over just some thought process behind building this before jumping right onto it. Um, so just from looking at this, we know that there's a outside container that sort of sits out in the outer layer here. We can sort of consider that as the outermost element, which in this case could just be a div. This could also be considered as the body tag when you have a full HTML document. Uh, but this whole code already sits inside a body element. So we're just going to use this outer top div for the global container um, that will basically set the other four elements that you see here. Okay, so first thing what we could do is we can just try to build out this container, which is again just a div. Um, and then maybe after we build that out, we can work on creating or basically just having four other containers that will basically sit in the center of this container. Um, so just from this design, it probably makes sense to have four different other divs because these are basically four different squares that are placed somewhat in the center. Maybe it's located slightly to the left, slightly to the top, bottom, whatever. It really doesn't matter as long as these four elements are sort of uh, included all together and spaced out uh, relative to each other. I think we should be fine. Okay, so just for the skeleton part of things, again, we're going to start with the container. So I'm going to give this div an identifier by giving it a class. You could also give it an ID, but class would still just be fine. I'll just call this the container. I'll get rid of all the CSS here so you're not confused with any existing CSS that might be applied here. Um, we'll come back to this in a little bit. Okay, so we have the outer container, and inside this container we have four different divs. We don't really have to consider um, which should go first. In some way, they're connected to each other in some ways. So for example, if you just consider this square, this is basically connected to this square by maybe just having some spacing between it, and it is relatively positioned right above it and to the right side of it a little bit. So we can use some sort of a relative uh, positioning, so to speak, um, to control that. Okay, so let's just work on the skeleton part of things. So inside this container, I'm going to add four different divs, each representing each square block that you see here. And I'm going to give this the first one, um, let's say, I'm just going to call this top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right. Obviously, you could name, these classes based on your preference. Um, that just makes more sense to me, so I'll give those um, that identifier. One thing I would also um, consider doing is that what are some similarities that we have between these four blocks? Obviously, they were all squares, right? They're basically all the same size, and they're squares. So probably it makes more sense to give it a shared class like square. Oops, square. And I'm going to go ahead and copy paste four of these squares. Um, and the top one, I'll just say this is top left. Um, to describe its position, then maybe top right. Again, the order of these things really don't matter as long as they're right next to each other. We're just gonna shift around certain things um, like the spacing of things. Um, Maybe using some sort of translate property within CSS. Again, maybe it's better we save that um, when we actually dive into the CSS part of things. Um, okay, the other two are bottom left and bottom right. Okay, good. Now, I think that's pretty much all there is to it as for the skeleton, so let's dive into the CSS. The first thing I like to do is many browsers, actually different browsers have different um, default CSS that are sort of already applied. Um, so some elements could already have uh, margins or a certain amount of padding that we do not really want to consider in this matter. We just want to start from scratch, right? So we don't want any pre-existing styles being applied to any of the elements. So what I tend to do is I target any item inside the body like that, and I say give every element that you have inside that body a margin of 0. By the way, sometimes the body tag itself could have some sort of styling, so maybe it's best to just use body slash this, or really just this. Um, but usually the things that are sitting inside the body is what you'll see visually, so you could just target body um, and anything within the body. So I want a margin of 0, I want a padding, not passing, padding of 0, and I also want to give box sizing, oops, border box, just like that. Cool, we're all good there. Now let's go ahead and target this container here. So here's the class, and this container is basically covers the whole width and the whole height of the body element. So I'm just gonna say the width is 100 view width and height is 100 view height. We can't quite see anything because we have to assign a color. So let's go ahead and add a background of this purplish color. And there we have it. So far so good. Now let's go ahead and work on the square, right? So again, all 4 of these blocks are squares. So we're going to target the square class here. And I don't really know how much this is. This is probably, I'm going to guess 100 pixels, but we can again play around with those later. 100 pixels, height is also 100 pixels, and I'm going to give it a background color of this color here. There you have it. I'm not sure if it's hard to tell or not, but I'm just going to explain this anyway. The reason why it looks like this is because you have 4 squares basically right underneath each other, so that's why you don't really see any spacing between it. One thing you could probably help if I add some sort of a margin. Again, this is just to show you how these 4 elements are sort of sitting um, basically on top of each other. So I'll give it a margin of 10 pixels, and there you can see they're sitting like that. Okay. I'm going to get rid of that. So one thing we could do is that let's work on the first square, right? So one idea that might come to your head is let's just make sure that this is somewhat centered to the middle, but it's really not, right? Because it's like centered, but it's also moved a little bit to the left and a little bit to the top. So how do we handle those? Generally, what you could do is that if an element is centered vertically or horizontally right in the middle, it probably makes sense to use either grid or flexbox layout. In this case, I think what makes sense is let's just try to um, make sure that this part here is centered, right? And what I usually do is I usually use relative and absolute positioning to create some sort of relationship. So it so based on where the element is sitting, it's always relative to the ones that are sort of right next to each other, and the one right next to it. So the first thing I'm going to try to do is let's just try to make sure we create this square and place this in the middle. And in this case, I want to make sure that this is sitting in the middle relative to this outer container here. So to do that, we need to assign or give this container class a position of relative. And I'm going to select the top left class here, and I'm going to give it a position absolute. This is basically to create some sort of a relationship between the outer container and the block that's sitting inside it. So far, you can't really tell any difference. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give this top left block a different color so it's easy to differentiate which block is which, basically which square. Um, so I'm gonna give it a background of, let's say, green. There we go. Now we can see it. So what we're going to do is we're going to place this in the middle. Um, we're going to use, because I give this as absolute positioning, we have to use top and left properties to shift it around a bit. So what I'm going to say is I want this square to move a little bit to the bottom, a little bit to the middle basically, like by 50%ish. And I also want you to move to the right a little bit by 50%ish. So same idea, top, I want you to move down 50%, and on the right, I want you to move down 50%. What happened? This really doesn't look like it's centered. Actually on the right side, from the left, right, because you want to add some sort of spacing to the left, so this actually should be left here. Still not that great, but one thing you'll notice is this is actually very close to this square here. So what I'm going to do is just change this to top, rather bottom right, this is the bottom right one. So I'm going to say bottom right. So I know I said I'm going to start with this. It really doesn't matter as much. Let's just say we're going to work on this one first, because as you can see, the placement of this is very close to wherever this is placed. So based on this, so far what we can tell is maybe the width and the height is a little bit bigger than what it's supposed to be. So I give it this in 100 pixel by 100 pixels. Maybe 90 makes more sense, I want to say. Not even, it's 80, I think. So if I give 80 and 80 for the square, and perfect. That's a perfect match right there. So we're already done with this, right? Now, all we have to work on is the four other ones, right? Let's work on this one next, because as you can see, like if we completed this one, it's just a matter of sort of moving this um, slightly above and a little bit to the left of it, right? So let's go ahead and select the top left square next. Again, all these will have the same styling or some shared styling there. I can probably, it probably makes more sense to give this, or basically have this position absolute style under the square, um, mainly because it is shared among all the other squares, right? So we don't really have to copy that multiple times. I'm going to give the top left a color of red, so again it's just easier to differentiate. Um, Maybe I missed something. Top left, right? I should have seen red here. Not really sure why that didn't come up. Top left, right? Yeah, that looks right. Not really sure why this one is not showing up. Let's give like a blue color. It's a background color, maybe. Huh. Maybe I missed something. Position absolute. Maybe it's sitting here, but right underneath somewhere. That's why you can't quite see it. What I'm going to do is give it a background color of blue. Um, going to say, hey, move this down by 50%. So top 50%, left 50%. Hey, there you go. I think now it's like sitting right on top of it. Now, what we want to do is move this to the left a little bit, and I want to move this up by another 80 pixels, right? Because the height of this is 80 pixels. So one thing we could use is something called transform. So I'm going to use transform here, and I'm going to say, I'm going to make use of the translate property, and I want to say, hey, move this, like wherever you're placed right now, move this to the left by about uh, 80 pixels, because the width of this is 80 pixels. So negative 80 pixels there, and uh, by the way, when I use translate, it basically expects me to pass in two different params. In this case, this is the x-axis value, and this is the y-axis. So obviously that's going to cover the vertical part of things. So right now, it is expecting a y-axis value. I'm going to say give it a 80, or rather I think negative 80 pixels um, there, and there you go. That's it. And this is pretty much done. We just have to make sure it's all the same color. I'll leave it blue for now. We'll change it later on. Same idea again for these other two, right? It's just a matter of, okay, we have it placed here. How do I shift it around a bit so it's placed somewhat relative to the rest of these elements, right? So quickly, I'm going to select the bottom left one, which is bottom left, which is this one here. Same idea. So top left is good. I'm going to give this a background color of pink. Don't know why I said pink, but let's go with it. Bottom left, so it's this one here. Um, can't quite see it. Not really sure why. Maybe the color should be different. I don't know. Orange, does it make a difference? It doesn't. I think it's like sitting right, like below it, basically. Right. It's been hidden by this green block. So what I'm going to do is move this over to the left by maybe 100 pixels. So I'm going to make use of the transform property here again. Translate. So shift this around, or basically move this to the left a little bit by about 80 pixels plus a little more spacing here. So I'm going to say about 100 pixels. I think that's right, but we also want to move it down a little bit. So I want to say, so right now it's placed here. I want to move it down a bit, so it's going to be maybe another 20 pixels. Bottom. Beautiful. Okay, great. That covers that. And the last one is top right. Same idea, but we probably just want to use addition here. So again, so it was sitting here. We want to move it up by about, so actually we want to move it to the right by about 20 pixels. So this is going to be negative 20 because we want to move it up a little bit. And I'm going to change the color to, let's say, pink. There you go, now we can see it. So this is going to move to the left a little bit more, right? So we want to use positive 20 pixels. So now it's moved to the right a little bit. And now we want to move it up by 80 pixels plus the spacing, which again is about 100 pixels. So I'm going to use negative because I want to move it up. So negative 100 pixels there. There you have it. I think the rest looks really good. Now let's just do some cleanup work. Let's go ahead and remove the background color from each one of these classes, and we should be good. The rest I think looks good. Seems like this is should be 100% match there. Yeah, that's pretty much it. let's go ahead and let me just see if there's any other cleanup we want to do. Um, one shared set of styles you might notice is the top and left property. We could have probably also put this under square. Um, Again, it's really doesn't make a big difference. There's many different ways we can organize CSS, but let's just leave this for now. Let's go ahead and submit this. Um, I forgot to log in. Actually, no. Play today's target. I think it should work. I lost it. Okay, good. Um, how do we submit it? Well, sorry, it's been a while since I did this last battle, so sorry about the whole wait. Maybe it's not nothing is really happening behind the scenes. I'm going to submit. Past daily targets are only super plus. Wow. Okay, well that's embarrassing. I should have done this before I started the video, but honestly, I think this is a pretty close match, so I'm gonna just say this is pretty good. Um, yeah, if I just look at the diff here, there you go. How is that for proof, huh? Alright, I think we're pretty much done here. Hopefully this helped folks, if anyone is stuck on this challenge. Um, Again, make use of relative and absolute positioning to create some sort of relationship between these elements, and just use the translate property to shift things around a bit. Um, but yeah, that pretty much covers it for this battle. Until next time, bye.